Now this, President Trump and Putin will be meeting in Alaska on Friday for a high-stakes meeting on the Ukraine war. Listen to what NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had to say about those talks.
He is still the main threat to the Western alliance, there's no doubt. And I think it is very good that President Trump will test him, and we'll see how far he can get on Friday, starting this process. We had a great NATO summit under his leadership, committing to 5% defense spending, so that is a clear signal to our main threat, which is Russia, that we are serious.
We are serious. NATO Ambassador Matthew Whitaker joins us this morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I guess the first question is, who holds the upper hand in this meeting, in your opinion?
Well, obviously, President Trump holds the upper hand. He created the circumstances that brought Vladimir Putin to the table by first approving the U.S. armaments and ammunition sales to our NATO allies. We did $1 billion in August. We should expect that will get bigger and continue. And then also, you know, the recent sanctions and tariffs against India, who is one of the big buyers of Russian oil. And that obviously has brought Vladimir Putin to the table. Now, Donald Trump has many more cards that he can play, but I think he wants to see Vladimir Putin face to face. He wants to see if Putin is serious about peace. And, you know, 80% of communication, especially, is nonverbal. And that's the situation that President Trump wants to identify.
With regard to Putin, is there anything less than gaining some ground, literally, some portion of Ukraine? And if that's the goal, I believe that Ukraine has to have a national referendum on any land being given to Russia. So it appears very complicated.
Well, of course. I mean, any peace deal is going to be complicated. Any agreement is going to have to be agreed to by both sides. And the good news is that for 3 years, until Donald Trump was elected, the two sides weren't talking. They weren't exchanging prisoners. They weren't exchanging the bodies of the fallen on the battlefield. This is a different situation, but you're right. There are going to be many steps to get a peace deal done.
Always is. I want you, Ambassador, to listen to what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say about the meeting. Listen to this. I'll get your thoughts.
And I think everybody knows that how this war ends can be a good thing or a bad thing. If it ends in a way, it looks like that Putin's overly rewarded, there goes Taiwan.
That's a very bold statement. Does the outcome of the Russia-Ukraine war, Mr. Ambassador, determine the future of Taiwan?
I mean, Senator Graham is absolutely right. All of our adversaries and strategic opponents are watching how this situation unfolds on the battlefield in Ukraine, making their own calculations. The Chinese certainly have expressed a desire long-term to potentially possess Taiwan. And so, you know, how Putin's war in Ukraine turns out is going to be evidence as to maybe how they pursue that acquisition. But at the same time, I just want to make sure, Ashley, you know, the United States believes in sovereign nations and is not in favor and will not support any aggressive actions from countries trying to take over more land.
All right, let's turn our attention to another region of the world in conflict. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just revealed his new plan to take down Hamas. It includes fighting in Gaza's central refugee camp. What are your thoughts on that plan?
Well, obviously, as long as Hamas is around, there's not going to be peace on the Gaza Strip. But there's three things that need to be addressed. Hamas is one of them. The hostages need to all be returned immediately. And then obviously the Hungary and humanitarian situation that we're seeing play out every day. And so each of those issues need to be addressed. Israel is obviously determined that they need to take care of Hamas first before they can take care of the other situations. But I think we have an opportunity here to end this war quickly as well. But you know, Israel is going to have to pursue their own peace deal, because ultimately they were attacked on October 7th. And I think that has colored everything that they're doing in Gaza.
Do you think the taking over of Gaza City, albeit temporary, is a necessary step in order to banish Hamas? And secondly, can you really do that? Can you eliminate Hamas?
Yeah, unfortunately, if Hamas doesn't lay down their arms, return the hostages, and become peaceful, there's only one way to do that, and that's through confrontation. Unfortunately, it's going to be a difficult slog through Gaza City. Hamas it controls this. They could end it immediately. They're the ones that are choosing this path.
You know, it's interesting, very quickly, just another, I guess, comment, Mr. Ambassador, that since we bombed Iran's nuclear facilities, I really haven't heard anything out of Tehran recently. I mean, that must be a good sign in one respect, right?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that between what Israel and the United States did against both their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and, Iran themselves, I mean, it has made them a lot weaker. But at the same time, Iran needs to decide that they want peace and completely abandon their nuclear program.
Right. Very good. So much to talk about, much of it about conflicts, unfortunately. But thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, joining us this morning with your insight. Always appreciated. Thank you.